Hello and welcome to TCAF Libraries and Education Day 2021, a day of programming about the possibilities for using comics in libraries and classrooms. This is our first year as an online event, so I think we're welcoming a lot of first-time attendees this year. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I'm Lindsay Gibb, and I'm the programming lead for Libraries and Education Day. To start, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival and L&E Day acknowledges that we are all coming to this event from different lands and territories, but that TCAF is located on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original custodians of the land on which we live, work, and create. This area is covered by Treaty 13 and is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement that means we share this land and should only take what we each need and make sure that the dish is never empty. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Tkaronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. Today, we have a full day of programming, including sessions on combating Indigenous stereotypes in comics, graphic medicine, science fiction comics, and a memoir comics workshop, along with live sessions where you can chat with publishers and creators. Since we're doing this online, you can tune in and out as you wish. Most of our programming will be available to view online for a month after TCAF. Our pre-recorded events will be available with full professional English language captioning, while our live sessions and Q&As will be auto-captioned. The social mingling and speed dating sessions will not be captioned due to technical limitations.
Hi, I'm Matthew, and I'm the programming coordinator for Libraries and Education Day. Before we begin our sessions, we'd like to thank some of Toronto Comic Arts Festival sponsors. The programming sponsor for TCAF this year is Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation. We also received government support from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. Also, special thanks to the Beguiling Books and Art and Page and Panel, the TCAF shop. After today's events are complete, you'll be receiving an email survey asking you to evaluate the Libraries and Education Day sessions. We hope that you'll fill out the survey because it will help us plan programming and access for next year's event. Finally, if you'd like to share about what's happening in the sessions today, we invite you to use TCAFLED as a hashtag on Twitter. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our keynote today, a conversation between Jeff Smith and Mark Askwith. Mark Askwith is a writer, producer, and interviewer. He is one of the founding producers of Space, Canada's national science fiction and fantasy channel, where he co-created in-house shows including The Circuit, Hyperspace, and Inner Space. His comic book stories have been published by Caliber Press, Spider Baby Graphics, DC Comics, and Image Comics. Jeff Smith is the New York Times bestselling author of the graphic novel series Bone, which is published in over 30 countries and is among Time Magazine's 10 best graphic novels of all time. Bone, winner of 41 national and international awards, was a pioneer in YA comics publishing when it was chosen to launch Graphics, Scholastic's graphic novel imprint in 2005. Smith's other award-winning and acclaimed comics include Shazam, The Monster Society of Evil, Razzle, Little Mouse Gets Ready, Rose, and Bone Tall Tales. Smith splits his time between Columbus and Key West with his wife and business partner, Vijaya Iyer, where he is working on his current project, Tuki, Fight for Fire. And without further ado, please welcome our guests. I guess we're not applauding in this one, but here they are.
I can applaud, Jeff. And thank you very much, Matthew. So 30 years ago, I was producing a television show called Prisoners of Gravity in Toronto. And the third issue of Bone came out, and I picked up the first 3 issues. And I was so enthralled, I was so enchanted that I called you up and arranged an interview. What was your reaction, Jeff?
Well, I was surprised. My memory is that you sent a fax or something, but then we talked on the phone, whatever, that's not important. I just was like, what? Some TV producer from Canada wants to talk to me? That's crazy. But I'm really glad you called, because that set off a chain of me meeting people and knowing people and getting involved in the industry that I don't think my career trajectory would have been the same without it. You introduced me to Charles Vess. You introduced me to Neil Gaiman. Charles Vess got me to go out to San Diego for the first time to the big Comic-Con International, which I didn't even know about. So but my first thought was just like, who is this guy?
Well,
But you're
amazing.
like one of the first people I met in comics, so it's been a long time.
It is a bit weird. But 30 years ago, I mean, that is to me a remarkable thing that we're still talking 30 years later, and Bone is still selling 30 years later. So what do you think accounts for Bone's longevity?
Oh my goodness, I wish I knew, because my other book would sell just as well. Honestly, I think it had to do with questions of love, embarrassment. Unrequited love was a big part of Bone. And I think that just translates all over the world and across ages. And that has to be what it is. But I don't know. I don't really.
I don't know either, which is why I asked the question. I just know as a reader that there were very, very few comics in that time period, in 1990s, 92, 93, 94, that had your energy and your reverence for what I saw as classic comic strip storytelling, like Walt Kelly and Peanuts. Now, you once told me that newspaper strips like Peanuts taught you how to read. Why do you think comics are such a gateway, not only to comics, but to literature as well?
Well, I think it's because you use both sides of your brain at the same time. I mean, you're reading and you're seeing the picture at the same instantaneously. And there's messages in the art. There's as much story in the art as there is in the little words that are in the balloon. So whether it's the movement of a character, or the milieu that he's in or she's in, or it's the expression on the character's face, those two things happen at the same time. And for some reason, I have met people that can't read comics, but they're usually adults. I've never met a kid that can't just immediately read comics. They know exactly what's happening. And we're a fairly visually sophisticated society at this point. Everybody's seen television and movies and is familiar with close-ups and establishing shots. Even if you don't even call them that, you know what you're looking at. So that same visual language is just present there. And I think that is why it's so easy to just fall into a comic and rock it.
You mentioned some certain cinematic techniques. How much has film influenced you in your storytelling?
Personally, a great deal. I mean, there are certain directors that really caught my eye. I mean, I fell in love with comics first, comic strips, then comic books. But when I was about 15, I saw Jaws in the theater, and something about Spielberg and the way he directs, and it's been a constant throughout his entire film career. It's Spielberg. It feels like Spielberg, but you forget that there's somebody directing it. He is invisible, and the story is just transparently out there. And so, like, his way of keeping the story moving, keeping your brain and your eyes occupied, I've tried very hard to replicate. He knows when to go in for a close-up. He knows when to slow down, all that kind of stuff. I mean, same things I learned from great cartoonists, but there's something about film that moves even more. But I feel like I could pull that into the comic and get the reader to start moving too. It's very important that the comics move, that they're alive. They can't just be, here's click, click, click. It's got to be, you got to go. It's got to have that energy.
So you have a background in animation. So did animation, and if so, what animators affected the way that you approached? Because it's so different to go from a moving image to a static image. So who were those animators that influenced you in that way?
In that way? Well, I mean, the animators that influenced me were, I love Disney movies, which is a conglomeration of artists. I mean, when I was a kid, the first movie I ever saw was Pinocchio. And I love all the Disney movies. But Chuck Jones from Warner Brothers, that had a big impact on me. But in some ways, that was more posing and acting and timing and just his sense of humor. I think other than that, I think mostly what I don't know. I don't know. Is that, sorry, I got lost at the end of the question there.
Yeah. No, but because it's really interesting because of some of the things that you were doing in Bone. And I remember saying this to you 30 years ago. I said, are you been looking at modern comics? And you said, no. And I said, well, then don't. Keep looking at what you're looking at, because it felt so fresh. Nobody was doing at the time what you ended up doing. And there were sequences in those first 2 or 3 issues, like with the snow falling, where it's the comic timing was so unusual. And I think one of the things that made Bone for me such an easy sell to people when I would recommend it, because it immediately made people laugh.
Well, timing comes from, just watching comedies, whether it's a Chuck Jones film or reading Doonesbury. Doonesbury was one of my most favorite comic strips because he had this kind of timing where he would set up a joke, it'd be like a 4-panel strip, or maybe it was 5 panels, but the penultimate, it was always 4. The penultimate panel, that 3rd panel, was sometimes just silent. And then you just got maybe just an eyebrow twitch in the 4th panel. And it was hilarious. It was, I learned timing really from comics and from cartoons. That's pretty much where it came from.
It's funny that, go ahead.
One piece of timing that I did in the 2nd issue of Bone was in the stupid rat creatures. So he's being chased by the rat creatures through the woods, and he jumps down near a waterfall down onto this little tiny branch. And in the last 2 panels of the page, at the bottom of the page, I had him down on the branch looking up, and the rat creatures are on the opposite cliff, screeched to a halt. And he says, those rat creatures would have to be really stupid to jump down onto this frail little branch. And then I didn't show them jump. The next panel, boom, they're on the branch. And he's yelling, stupid, stupid rat creatures. And I don't know how I made that decision, but I learned something right there. I said, that's funny. That's fast and that's funny. And to this day, if I hadn't drawn that comic, I doubt you'd be talking to me 30 years later. That one joke was it.
In fact, yeah, I was going to talk to you. You brought up 2 things that I want to talk about. One is Bone is filled with silence, and the silence at the beginning is kind of innocent and comedy. And as it goes along, a lot of the silence are emotional pivots and darkness. So why was the silent panel so important to you?
Well, as I mentioned, Gary Trudeau in Doonesbury used the silent panel all the time, and it was such a deliberate act of pacing that it left a big imprint. Then 2 other artists, Walt Kelly, especially in Pogo, especially during the McCarthy years when he had a character named Wile E. Cat that represented Joseph McCarthy, the blackballing senator. He had a sequence that was somewhat terrifying for a silly, funny animal comic strip, where Deacon Muskrat, who was kind of like on Wiley's side, he would sort of be like Lindsey Graham to Donald Trump, but he turns on him, but then all of a sudden Wiley's chasing him through the swamp with a shotgun and a giant axe, and there are all these silent panels that are just deadly. It's frightening, and I learned there that there's a power there, a dread that you can create with a moment of silence. You don't always have to make every sound. Readers will fill in sounds. In fact, sometimes you'll see huge onomatopoeias from me, crack, boom, splot, thud. Sometimes I don't do anything, and there'll be in my current book, Tukey, there's a point where a saber-toothed tiger roars because something right behind him smashes, and I don't put any sound in it, but you know what's happening, and you're hopefully frightened for Tukey because we just startled this saber-tooth and he's upset, but I didn't know sound effects. Sometimes it's just more powerful that way.
Yeah, the other thing that you do that to me is unique to comics, and you didn't have it in the strips, was this idea of the page as a unit and the page turn. And I notice a lot of your right-hand side at the bottom, those last few panels or the last panel, they are really important to you. They set up a real rhythm. But how important is the page turn for you?
Very, very important. And In fact, when I'm getting ready to put out a book or something, I have Tom Gott, who works with me. He does all the digital layouts in InDesign, and when he sends it to me, I want it put in double page spreads. I want to see what's. I want to know, because sometimes things change, and you lose track of what's on the left and what's on the right. Because what is in the spread together has a different. You move between those differently than what's on the end of the right-hand page, as you're talking about, and you turn it. There's a slight pause, and you can use that pause to your advantage. You can use that pause for a little tension, mostly for tension. But you also need to know, because that moment there's a break in the concentration. You want to get them back real quick. So you got to know what that last panel was and get them back, whether it's some way to remind them where everybody just was. Now, everybody else at Cartoon Books, Jaya and Kathleen, Tom, they all like to look at it one page at a time. When they review it, they just go, scroll up one page at a time. I need to see both, because it's very important to know what's going to be broken up by the page turn.
And it's interesting too, because Bone didn't have ads in the middle of it. So you could pace it that way. For a lot of the comics that I was reading in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s had ads, so that even the best writers and artists were really, they didn't know where a page turn was going to be, except for maybe page 1 you knew was a splash page, 2 and 3 you knew would be printed. So you'll see someone like Jack Kirby use that trick a lot. But once you got into the story, they didn't know where the ads were going to fall.
Well, I don't know why it became important to me. I don't remember where I saw that originally, or if it was just something that naturally came to me I don't remember that. But I do, to this day, I pay a great deal of attention to 2-page spreads.
Yeah, your level of craft right from the beginning to me was very, very high. And your comics were comics, which I know sounds a bit odd, but a lot of comics to me felt like somebody had written a movie script and sort of decided to illustrate it. There was no sense of what comics can do. So why do you think comics are such a unique medium, and what do they allow you to, as a cartoonist, to do?
I've thought about this a lot over the years, and I've been asked about it a lot.
And mostly by me.
Well, but a part of it, first let me just say that comics were something I obsessed over when I was a kid. From, as you mentioned, I learned to read from comic strips, from Peanuts specifically. My dad used to read me the Sunday Funnies when I was really young. But then, he was at work. So during the week, I would eventually try to learn to read Peanuts by myself through little paperback collections and stuff. And I did. But also, once I got into comic books, it was about the time of Jack Kirby and Neil Adams. And this was the very first time you started to see the names of the artists, the creators who were behind these books. Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Neil Adams, Gil Kane, Denny O'Neil, all these people, Irv Novak. And I just obsessed over it. I just looked at every page, every panel. Some of the things like I'll do a sequence where the characters stay the same size in the panel and their movements are relatively boom, 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 some action. It'll keep you right there with the character right next to him. I don't change the sizes or change the camera angle. I got that from Neil Adams. I saw some early Neil Adams in between 69 and 71, where he would do that. And since then, I've seen some things like that in some kind of reprints. But all that, I just obsessed over it. I wanted to know every little thing in the background. Mad Magazine was a great example of this. There's tons of extra little goodies and Easter eggs, we would call them today, of little funny posters and drawings in the background. I don't know why I was so obsessed with that. I think it's because comics kind of were for kids back in the 60s and 70s, or still were. And it was like a private place. It was a private thing. This was my little island, and I really loved it. And one last thing, let me just add that going all the way back to Peanuts and Pogo and Mad Magazine for that matter. These were some of the few places I would actually read real truths. They would talk about Peanuts, say. Charlie Brown talked about embarrassment and humiliation, on the playground at school, being embarrassed to talk to the curly redheaded girl or whoever he had a crush on. Those were real emotions. I mean, you saw it on Charlie Brown's face. I mean, 2 dots, squiggly mouth, and you knew his stomach was destroyed. He was that's amazing. So I got that. And then with Peanuts and Mad Magazine, they were jokes, but they were talking about what adults were really up to. What was really happening on Madison Avenue and advertising and how phony it was. So I don't know. I was obsessed with comics and they were telling me the truth about everything. So I can't explain it any better than that. And I wish I could have explained it in a quicker time frame, and I apologize.
It's quite all right. We have time. The other thing that's interesting is that certain characters, and I always think it goes back to, well, maybe it goes back to, maybe it goes far as back as cave paintings, but to me, as far back as Mickey Mouse, you have a shape that is instantly recognizable as Mickey Mouse. And Bone is fascinating to me because your 3 main Bone characters are instantly accessible in silhouette. And somehow, and I don't really know why, I can empathize with them as much as I do, say, the human characters like Grandma Ben and Thorn. So, and that's a mystery to me. Why do you think that we can read realistic characters as well as the hugely cartoony characters? And in your work, you actually put them together in the same page, often in the same frame.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the jokes of the original idea of Bone, was that the bones come from Boneville, which is implied to be something like Duckburg, an anthropomorphic place where they have, automobiles with big round tires, and somewhere in the middle of Boneville there must be Phony Bone's giant money bin. But it's a place like it's a satire almost of our modern culture, okay, of Western culture. And so we automatically identify with the bones because they come from here, and they're the ones who are entering this strange kind of like almost European fairy tale land with dragons and monsters and sleeping princesses and grandmas living out in the woods and that kind of stuff. So that was part of the original joke, and the fact that you can identify with the bones is purely just because they have personalities. Just giving them personalities, drawing the right faces on them. You know Paul Pope, right? Well, Paul Pope used to ask me, he's like, "Don't you ever get bored of drawing?" Because the bones, they just 2 dot eyes and the bulbous head and the bulbous nose. He said, "Don't you ever get tired of drawing that same face over and over again?" I said, "Paul, I never draw the same face over and over again. They're always thinking something different. And every drawing of them is what they're thinking, even though that comes from Charlie Brown. You can express so much with just the simplest of lines."
When you were young, how important were libraries to you?
Oh, very. I grew up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and we were in a little tract subdivision that was set up for people returning from World War II, but my dad was actually in the Korean War. But the library, the Little Worthington Library, man, I loved it. I mean, it was a great place. And one of my first cartooning memories had to do with the librarian, because I was trying to draw my own comics, but I was just using them I was just drawing little, and they were they were bone comics. I had Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone existed, and they're surprisingly the same characters. They've not grown at all. But I would go to the library, which was the only place that had a copying machine. And you had to put a dime in the machine, and I would copy my drawings because I had my little comics and I wanted to publish my comics, right? And I'm probably 9 or 10 years old here. And the pencil just didn't copy on the machines. It just didn't come out. I didn't understand anything. I don't think copiers back then were that, they weren't that friendly. They didn't make it adjustable so you can make it darker. So anyway, I went up to the librarian and I explained my problem. And you know what she did? She went and found a book on how to draw cartoons, which had a very clear section on inking. And that's what I needed to do, is I needed to learn how to ink. And I'll tell you what, I went and I got ink pens and I got a bottle of India ink and I learned how to ink.
That's an amazing story. And the libraries were
That's my
important.
cutesy story. You want to get into the hardcore stuff. I've been one of the most banned books of like the last 15 years. And librarians are the first line of defense. They stand up for banned books. They know, and librarians know that graphic novels are reading. That is something that maybe I don't need to push it as hard today, but in 2005 or in 1995, there were people that really didn't believe that. And even today, there are people who will go into a library and say, I don't want my kids reading these, especially like school libraries. I don't want my kids reading these. This isn't real reading. This is laziness. Well, the librarians know better, and they stand up for kids reading and freedom of expression. Really, they're the defenders of the First Amendment. Well, in the U.S. Sorry.
No, it's very, very true. And libraries were a huge impact on my life. And my mom used to raise, she was a children's bookseller and collector, and she would raise money every year for the school that I went to, the grade school that I went to. And but libraries, it's astonishing to me. And one of the neat things about TCAF, the first time you came was the second year, and it was all intense. But I think the next time you came, it was actually in the Toronto Reference Library. And I remember you walking in and seeing this magnificent structure. What was your reaction to the Toronto Metro Reference Library?
Well, I was very impressed. It is a beautiful library, and the openness of it was super, I don't know, friendly to the TCAF event. Because you walked in and you didn't just see like a couple of rows of people with their comics that they had on the tables, but it went up the stairway and you could see that there was more stuff, and you really felt like there's a lot happening here. I thought that was a brilliant move, and I stole it later. I started about 6 years ago. I started a comics cartoon festival in Columbus called Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, or CXC. And I know the guys at the Beguiling, and I'm very friendly with TCAF. And I told them I want to copy TCAF for this, and we try to help each other out. And so I put CXC in the library downtown in Columbus, completely stealing that from TCAF.
How difficult was that to convince them that CXC needed to be in the library?
Not too. The library, I always thought the library was going to be hard. The first year we had it, it was in like this little old armory that was left over from like the Civil War. That is, in recent decades, has been like an art craft community place for people to go and learn how to do different, throw clay and stuff like that. And we had it there, and we set up all the tables and everything. I don't remember how many people we had. I think we could fit like 65 tables, and it was our first year. We opened the doors and we outgrew that place in 15 minutes, and we were mashed. And I knew, because that's a scary thing when you're setting up a festival. It's like, will Columbus show up, and will Columbus buy comics? Fortunately, it turned out that they did, and as they do in Toronto. Toronto, I know that. But the very next year, we had to find a bigger place, and we went to and Tom Spurgeon was going around with me. We're pushing us, and Tom is, he could just charm anybody. He's just he knows so much about comics. He just has this very gentle but persuasive way about him. And we went to the library, and I didn't think they were going to go for it. They went for it. They loved it. They loved it. Oh, and also we were like, we promised them that I was like, I'm friends with Raina Telgemeier. It's like, oh, I can get Raina. They're like, you get Raina? They didn't care about me, but I'm like, Raina? Oh yeah, we'll do it. So then we could set it up. We get Raina, and I did get Raina in there, so that was good. Thank goodness. It's like,
Well, why is that so important? I mean, CXC, you've been a huge supporter of TCAF. Why are these events, these outreach events, so important, do you think?
it's my feeling that most of the forward momentum, not just for me, but for every step forward in comics as it moves into more popular culture and being more respected, most of this happens at these comic book gatherings. I mean, in San Diego, Comic-Con International, I mean, that's the granddaddy of all the comic book shows. Or you could argue that it might be in Angoulême in France. But what happens there is not just so many people coming and fans dressing up, like their favorite characters, but there's an energy, there's a real alchemy at work there, because you've got all the people that make comics, you've got all the people that read comics, and you've got all the people that sell comics, and all the people that write about comics are all in one place. So a lot of things are happening. You're getting people like me early on. The first one I went to was in '92. The second one I went to was in '93. They were nowhere near as big as they are today, but they were still pretty damn big. But people saw my stuff. I went because you introduced me to Charles Vess. I met Charles Vess, and he asked me to sit at his table with me. He invited me to it. And then Charles introduced me to the people that run the convention. So by the next year, they asked me to do like a poster for the convention. So, I mean, things happen when people get together. And it's been very, it's been very rough this past year and this year. But I think we're going to get past it. But I believe that new people that want to get into comics, they really need to go to these places. It's a very healthy atmosphere. Unlike the internet, it's a very healthy atmosphere. That's very warming and inviting, and a lot of people will give you good advice.
When I managed the Silver Snail from '82 to '87, I brought in artists and writers every month, because that was the one thing that I really felt was missing from comics, was that creators and young kids needed to meet these people and feel that they were humans. I mean, I think my career is about human beings made this stuff. I just want to point out that Jeff Smith is a human being, Charles Vess is a human being, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the outreach part of comics.
I'm not sure Neil's a human being, but we'll get back to that. No, he's a lovely human being. Lovely.
So I totally agree with you. And there's been a real sea change, because the conventions in my day were not very pleasant. And that's why I did store signings, because the store was beautiful and there was nice lighting, and you did some signings at the Snail. So you know what it is. And the fans were great. Well, I wanted to go back though, because you were talking about San Diego, 1994, and that's the poster from '94. That was a really big, I was thinking.
Oh, wow, that's right. That's the poster I was just talking about that they asked me to do, right?
Yeah. I should have gone to that as my segue, but I'm such an amateur, I didn't know to do that. But I was thinking about your career in terms of turning points, and one of the big turning points is San Diego, 1994, because you did that poster, and you were nominated for a bunch of awards and won 3 of them. Best writer artist, which I guess is cartoonist, best continuing series, and best long story, which was the cow race. What kind of impact did the Eisner Award have on you, and like, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I can't overstate that. That moment that was really something. In '91, '92, and even into '93, I was a little nervous about the sales. We were a little They were not doing that great, and they were starting to get lower every issue. But I was encouraged by, I would go to comic book conventions, and back in those days, comic book conventions were usually, they were in one hotel. So everybody, retailers, fans, cartoonists, all went and hung out in the bar at the hotel. And I was encouraged because I would meet, Scott McCloud, or I'd meet Frank Miller or Neil, and they would, clap you on the back and, say nice things. And that, so even though my sales weren't too good, I had a little encouragement, and I felt like I wasn't being shut out of the club, if I could put it that way. However, in '94, it changed. There was that poster that's behind you. And then at that show, I think I told you this story recently, which maybe while you're prompting me, but I went to the Eisner Awards ceremony, and it was in a big room. It was like in the biggest room that it had been in since I went to the 2 years before that. It was a huge room. It was a big audience. I'm going to say it's like between 3,000 and 5,000 people in that room. And I was one of the guests. And the show is, everybody's getting in their seats and stuff. And in the two corners of the room, they have like a little setup where you could buy like a glass of wine or some soda or something. So I got up to buy some wine for Vijay and I, my wife. And also I was wearing a suit. Not too many people wore suits back then. I thought that, hey, you're going to an award show, you should wear a suit. I didn't. So I'm overly dressed. I go over and I'm ordered a glass of wine. And while I'm in line, just about to order my glass of wine, the show starts, and they start introducing the different guests, and each guest stands up somewhere in the audience, and they applaud and they applaud. And I just got my glass of wine when they said my name, and everybody's looking around to see, because nobody knew what I looked like. In fact, most people, when they would meet me, they'd be surprised that I wasn't like a little old man. They thought I was like Carl Barks or something. So nobody knew who I was. They wanted to know what I looked like. And I just was standing over by the wine thing. I didn't know what to do. I turned around. Somebody spotted me and says, "He's over by the bar." And the whole room, I saw the whole room, everybody's face turned toward me. And I just lifted up my glass of wine. And the roar that came at me was unbelievable. I'll never forget that the rest of my life. I'll never forget it. It was awesome.
I was actually at that because I was an Eisner judge that year. And it was that was a great night. But I really felt, we were talking.
You were an Eisner judge?
Yeah, that year. Yeah.
Did I ever pay you that?
No, you never did. But we did meet the day. I remember we had breakfast the next day with Charles Vess, and you were stunned. And you knew then at the moment though that something had changed. You were like, I think I'm going to be okay, which was an understatement in a way, but we all understood it. It was like, this was your coming out moment. Like you had suddenly arrived after 2 graphic novels. And everybody at that time, we all had fallen in love with this second volume of Bone. The cow races, man, it's an astonishing milestone in those early comics. And it's one of the reasons why I think Bone has survived for 30 years and is still relevant. That book still feels fresh. I read it yesterday. It's nuts. It's so electric. Now I want to talk briefly about your new project, because you decided not to do that and publish it in black and white and put it out in books like this. It's Tukey, which started as a web comic. Why did you want to have that delivery system?
I think I just wanted to try. I just wanted to dip my toe in this obvious new area, this new arena for comics publishing. And I knew people that were doing quite well at it. Kate Beaton, for example, was doing her Heart a Vagrant. And I was just nuts about her comics. And then eventually met her like at SPX and probably TCAF. So I just wanted to give it a shot. Why not? Why not try it? I ended up not liking it. It was not a good experience for me, and I'm not going to blame webcomics or the medium. It was me. It required a great deal of attention, constant attention. So you had to put your one page up a week, which I could handle that. But people want to talk to you. You need to have a world going on, and I was not I was not quite capable of that. I had a lot of fun in my comic books, once every 2 months doing like a letters page, but because that was fun. That was a really important place for some kind of interchange or feedback. But the web was overwhelming to me. I had other problems, which I don't want to go into, but basically, I didn't think when I collected those web pages and put them in comic books, I was trying to do like a Prince Valiant page every week. So it'd be like the Sunday funnies, right? But when you put them together, there was a real start and stop quality to it. And I thought, I'm going to have to redraw this. And that's what I did. I redrew Tukey and I rethought it, because once the kids came into the story, I knew it was a family story. And I knew I had to go back to the beginning and start from scratch.
But it's coming up. You decided to do it on Kickstarter. Why Kickstarter the project?
Well, I wasn't going to do it on Kickstarter. I was planning on just self-publishing it the way we did Bone and Rassle, although the world is different. The distribution is different. It's not all the same. And just at the right time, a couple of old self-publishing pals of ours, people that were friends that we knew back in the 90s, Billy Tucci and his wife, Deborah, who did his comic She, and also Brian Polito and his wife, Francisca, who do Lady Death. Their comics nothing like Bone in any way, but we all had each other's backs. We were all trying to help each other as we were trying to get our comics done. We all had our tables near each other at shows and stuff. Well, anyway, they contacted Vijaya and they wanted to have her on Billy's podcast, and they were all having fun reminiscing about the old days. But then they started talking about Kickstarter. Those guys do Kickstarter, and I wasn't that interested in Kickstarter, because when I first started out, it just seemed like, people who were just starting out kind of needed a boost or something. This is different now. It is, I think it's now close in many ways to the situation that was there in the 90s. Because like I said, the 90s had 11 or 12 distributors. Now there's only one. So back in the 90s, if one distributor didn't carry your books, there were others that would. Now there's just a solid gatekeeper. Kickstarter is the removal of gatekeepers. You get out there, and if people are interested in your book, then you get to give it to them. And they want to help you. So that's not to say the people that want to avoid gatekeepers don't want to be on the shelves of comic book stores. We do. And as soon as we can all get back into comic book conventions and meet up with all of us readers and retailers all together, that's going to get worked out, because we're in a new era. But that was a very long answer, which is all I've given you all day. But that's why we finally got talked to try and Kickstarter, and it's super exciting.
So I've avoided asking you these questions because I know the next couple of questions I'm going to ask you you're probably inundated by this, but I have to ask. 30 years, 30th anniversary of Bone, and you're in the process of becoming a Netflix show. Bone is about to be a Netflix show, which to me is another potential turning point. This could be another huge turning point for you. So tell me, first of all, how did you feel about this project, and what's your involvement?
Well, we talked about that turning point of San Diego at the Comic-Con. The next one, of course, was Scholastic and Graphics, taking Bone into the schools. That was a big turning point. How did I feel about it? I'll tell you, to be honest, Mark, I was so exhausted by how terrible Hollywood is. Because I've worked with so many studios, Paramount, Nickelodeon, Sony, Warner Brothers, and it's been nothing but hell. It's just the shittiest possible way to spend your time. Sure, you get some money, but that's not what you want. You want to have the fun of making something. And that's 20 years, 1998 to 2018. Did I do the math right there? It was just terrible. And so Warner Brothers just put it on a shelf and wouldn't talk to me. And I just had to wait for their rights, the contract to run out. And it ran out in 2018, and I got the rights back. And I'll tell you, I did not want to let anybody know that I had the rights back. Vijay and I talked it over, and I said, let's just, no movies. No, Bone has done what it's done. It's in 30 languages. It's all over the world. It's done what it's done without a movie. And we can be proud of that. I never want to talk to another bastard executive at a studio again. So we did not let anybody know. And then Netflix called. And they made so much sense to me, and they knew, they got it. They got it. Here was the problem. The problem with the studios was they all wanted to do the whole movie, the whole 1,350 page story in one animated kids movie. And they could never figure out how to do it. And they wouldn't listen to me. They just wouldn't listen to me for sure. So Netflix, here they come, and they want to do it as a show. So it's, it'll be serialized, just like the book. The story will unfold just like the book. And I just had a story meeting with the group, the whole group last night, and I am looking forward to this again. They brought me back from the dead. Who knows?
I'm so thrilled. I realized, as you were talking, that I missed a major turning point, which was Scholastic, of course. Your books, I remember when the first color book came out, and we talked on the phone, and you were like, oh my God, and we could see the color work that Steve Hamaker had done that was so brilliant. And then I remember you were working on another project, I think it was Shazam, and you said, I have to stop that because I'm now going to go on tour. What kind of impact did A, Bone going into color, and B, being supported by Scholastic, and C, then your whole global tour? What kind of impact did that have on you and on Bone?
Well, I think it had. I think it had an impact. I mean, the fact that Scholastic picked it up. I mean, boom, they called, and again, it was a situation where we had talked to a few. We had been approached. We've been very lucky, and we've been very lucky because movie studios have approached us and publishers have approached us, and we got approached by a number of mainstream New York publishers who knew that there was something going on with this Bone book, but they would always want to do something stupid, like, well, this is a great story, the kids love it. Let's just rework it so that there's one page is an illustration and the other page is text. And I said, you want to make Bone into a big little book? I said, it's already successful. Vijay had already gotten it published. At that time, it was like in 20 languages around the world already. And we're like, it was almost done. I said, I said, next, we're not doing it as a big little book. But when Scholastic called, Jean Fywell was the president or the publisher at that time. And she called and talked to Vijaya. And it was so fun because the publisher of Scholastic is on the line for you, Vijaya. And Vijaya goes in her office and closes the door. And me and Kathleen and Tom, there's only 4 of us that work at Cartoon Books. But we all get around like little kids trying to hear what's going on. And Vijaya comes out and she says, we have to talk to these people. They get it. They don't want to put it with the pop-up books. They don't want to change it in any way. They want to publish it as it is, as a children's book, and they want to shelve it right next to Harry Potter. Okay. So that is what happened. They held up their end of the deal, and it was pretty good. And of course, not a couple of years after that, Rita Telgemeier joins the imprint, and graphics has exploded right through the freaking ceiling. Unbelievable. I'm so proud of her. She's the queen of graphic novels.
Yeah, I actually met her through you because when she came on the tour for graphics, it was you and Raina. And that was because she was coming, I had to read all the graphic novels. And I think at that time it was the Babysitters Club. And I was enthralled by it. And my daughter was the right age. So she was my beta tester on that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to conclude actually with something that I've been thinking a lot about. You started drawing bone when you were 5. What advice do you have to parents and educators who run across a kid like you, like a single-minded, the young Jeff Smith or a female version of Jeff Smith shows up? What would your advice to that parent or educator be?
Well, before I answer that, I want to say that there are a lot of female cartoonists. When I was a kid, I don't remember too many women working in the business. And even when I was starting in the 90s, there weren't too many. But now, the best cartoonists are women. And there's just a general diversity, not only of gender, but of race and content, the kinds of comics that are being done. That has really enriched this entire thing. And anything you want to do in comics, you can do. It's wide open. That was not always the case. So whatever you want to do a comic about, do it. Whoever you are welcome in this field. What advice would I give to parents? Well, let me answer that with a little story. As Bone was starting to get known through the Scholastic catalogs and that part, I got an email from she was a little girl at the time, but someone I went to kindergarten with. And now obviously she's an adult, she's a mother. And she wrote to me and she says, "Oh, I was so proud to see, and you're still drawing Phone Bone." She says, "But my son is getting in trouble a lot at school because he draws all over and he loves the bone. He's getting in trouble because he draws all over his papers and stuff. And I wonder if you could write back and tell him to please stop doing that." And I said, "Oh, I cannot tell him that. That's where I did my best work, was on math quizzes. So that's the best I could do, buddy."
Well, thank you very, very much, Jeff. It was, as always, such a pleasure. It's super fun, and we miss you. I hope you'll come back to TCAF when things open up. And thank you so much for giving the keynote today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, man. Oh, and let me just say a shout out to all the librarians and everyone who supports them. They mean so much to literature and to graphic novels. It's a big deal. Thank you. Oh, and I want to say hi to Bruce Peck, who's our friend, who just had a birthday recently, and my new project, Tukey. There's a Kickstarter that's going on right now. I don't know how you get to it at this point. You just find me. It's called Tukey Fight for Fire.
Tukey, Tuki. Come
That's
on, you
right.
got to do the branding, Jeff. You have to do the branding.
I tried.